That is probably what most people think you mean when you say you're going to water cool your PC, but what actually is it and do you need it? Well, we've come to the right place. To start off, there's actually three ways to cool your PC. Water cooling be two of them mainly. So first off, we've got air cooling. This is your standard cooling, stock coolers and all of that. That falls all under just normal air cooling. Then you've got AIOs, and then you've got custom loop water cooling. Alright, let's look at the difference between air cooling and water cooling. So, this is just the standard air cooler. How this works is you have the heat from the CPU, which is applied right here. The CPU, this actually is on the CPU. Then these heat pipes right here, there's 4 of them on this cooler. It may vary depending on the cooler. These heat pipes actually take the heat from the CPU and transfers them up into the fins, which is right here, and then air is blown over it and the heat is taken away. So it's fairly simple and robust, and even if your fan dies, there isn't anything that can go wrong. If your fan dies, there will still be some level of cooling, but you will, after time, you'll notice your CPU gets hotter. Right, let's look quickly at a custom water loop, how that works. So this is just for representation, but you have your CPU block. Now this is also right directly in contact with the CPU, and this is actually where the heat is transferred from the CPU into the water or the liquid or the fluid that you're using. And that has a lot of micro fins on it, and that is actually where the heat is transferred from the CPU block or the GPU block to the water. Alright, and then once it's in the water, it gets transferred, it gets pumped around, obviously with a pump. So this is just another representation of a pump. So this is just what pumps the fluid around your system. And then it's carried over to a radiator. And at the radiator, this is actually where the heat is transferred from the water into the air. So the bigger your radiator is, the more heat transfer you have, the more cooling potential you have, and all the cooler your components will be. You also get different sizes radiators, so you get thinner ones, thicker ones, you get 120mm ones, you get 140mm ones, you get single or dual. This is a dual one, so they can fit on 2 fans on each side. Then you also have your reservoir. Now this is in an AIO, you don't have a reservoir, but in a custom loop, you normally have a reservoir. So this is where you would fill it up, and then the pump would normally be directly beneath this, taking fluid or water directly out of the reservoir. And then the last thing, you have tubing. Now the tubing is literally just to get the water from the blocks to the pump, or from the pump to the radiator, and so forth. So that is basically how it works with the water. The water is literally just there to take the heat from a small area and apply it to a big area where it can more efficiently be dissipated into the air. So the reason why we use water cooling in computers is actually quite simple. So with a normal air cooler, you are quite restricted to the surface area of where you can spread the heat. So this is just a normal 120mm single tower air cooler, and this will cool most CPUs like perfectly, and you won't have any problems or thermal issues, except maybe for the very high-end CPUs, which produces a lot of heat. You might want a dual tower for that. But looking at why you want to go water cooling, this is actually the most area that you can fit on this single tower. You could increase the fin size, make more stacks, but that wouldn't help. The reason for this is the heat transfer from the CPU, which is down here, through the heat pipes isn't that efficient. So with this design, and well, any designs really, the heat transfer is really where the problem comes in. So you can't really add more fins, bigger fins, more of them. This wouldn't really help because the heat won't get transferred all the way. Even with this cooler, if this is on a CPU and the CPU is pushed to its limits using like Cinebench or something, then you can actually feel at the edges of the fins, it's much cooler than actually the center. And this is very simple because the heat can only transfer that far before it doesn't transfer anymore. And that is why we use water cooling. Water cooling allows us to transfer the heat much more efficiently and to a much bigger surface area through the use of a radiator. So as you can see, this is roughly double the size of the air cooler, as you can see here. And the reason why this is important is because purely of the surface area. So the surface area is literally the whole surface of where the transfer of heat can take place from the water to the air, because ultimately air is what is going to take the heat away from your system and into your room. And the use of radiators makes this much more efficient because the surface area is so much bigger, and water transfers heat so efficiently that you can just pump your water through a radiator or even multiple radiators in your system, depending on your case and how many components you have and how much power they use. And this is where it's really efficient because your radiators can be much bigger than just a normal standard heatsink. So now that you basically know how a water cooling loop works, let's look into why you would actually want to water cool. Well, as I said, there's much better temps. So I actually did a video where I water cooled my GTX 1080 Ti. You can go check that out up above. And there you'll actually see towards the end of the video all the temperature differences that I measured before and after I installed the water block. And yeah, this is literally directly related to the bigger surface area, so your temps can be lower. The second thing is actually a longer lifespan. So a lot of research has shown that if your PC components actually has a lower temperature through its lifespan, it increases the lifespan of your components, because as you can think, all the heating up and cooling down when you go play games, for instance, do a render and then shut off, those deltas are quite big, sometimes ranging from 20 degrees at its coldest all the way up to 90 or even 100 degrees in extreme cases, and that delta is very high. So with water cooling you can bring that delta smaller, and remember, with all this heating and cooling, the actual dies and the components do actually expand and contract in size by, it's very small, but it's enough to over a few years or even a decade can really damage your components. So this is why it's very useful to have water cooling, because those deltas are really smaller, and yeah, overall all your temps are just much lower in your system. So with your temps being lower, that means also your noise will be lower because your fans doesn't have to spin as fast. And compared to a normal heatsink, which can only take a single fan, radiators can take up to, well, as many fans as your case can take, depending on your case, the size of it and all of that. But for this radiator, you can have two 120mm fans, which almost translates to double the cooling. So that means that your fans can spin much slower while still providing the same level of cooling, or they can spin at the same speed, but then deliver much better cooling to your components. The fourth reason is actually dust. Because you have more fans, you can spin them slower, which means less dust actually gets into your system. And one thing that I found out in my personal use case is radiators are actually very efficient in capturing dust or hairs or just particles that are pulled in through your case. And this is much easier to clean off than a fan, because literally you can put this under your tap and yeah, just flush it out with water, maybe a soft brush, and just brush it all off. So it's very easy to clean as well. And then the fifth reason, which isn't really a reason, but I'm going to put this in here anyway, is it looks pretty great. I mean, you probably have seen some water cooling systems out there, some custom builds, maybe some scratch builds that look really cool with water cooling. So water cooling really adds some bulk to your PC, it fills up some dead space, and it really just aesthetically looks pretty cool if you have water cooling through your system. So I just love the way that all the water flows through the blocks, through the reservoir, and you can have different color coolants, you can even have different types of coolants. I know there's some that even contain some particles, so it looks like it's two fluids in one. That looks pretty sick. So yeah, with the visual effect, water cooling actually does a lot for me. I really like the look. So in the future, I'm planning on doing a video on how to actually start water cooling, where to begin, what to look out for, some tips for beginners. So if you want to stay tuned for that, remember to subscribe with the bell icon. Also leave a like on the video, leave a comment down below of what you think about water cooling. Will you be doing it? Yeah, thank you for watching guys, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.